Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 13. Friends, Daf Yud Gimel is a treat that you have earned over the past 2 weeks of hard work and really, putting all of our energy into these dafs. Masechta Ayruvin is giving us a beautiful, beautiful treat with Daf Yud Gimel. So, grab your favorite beverage, maybe not if you're driving, kick back if you're in a Tesla, if you're driving, and enjoy Masechta Ayruvin, Daf Yud Gimel. So, there is not too much of a intro that there is to do, because there's just so much beautiful agadata that is not like juicy stuff over here. There is going to be some small machloksin about sota at the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph about can you use the parsha of sota that's written in the Torah as the parsha of sota that you erase in the water, and also if you wrote a Megillah sota for one person, can you use it for somebody else? Alright, friends, let's jump in. Yud Beis Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom. Mishum Mishmal Amr Talmud Echad Chulei. Rabbi Kiva Omer Alzev Alzen Echliku. So there was a certain student in our Mishnah who said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in terms of do you need both a lechi and a korah, or is it a lechi or a korah? So there was that student that said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael that this machlokas only begins at a width of 4 amas. Less than 4 amas, however, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that all you need is a lechi or a korah. To which Rabbi Akiva responded that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is at all widths, even if it's smaller than 4 amas. Okay. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva anu Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva seems to be the same thing as the Tanakama, meaning Tanakama said that Beis Shammai requires a lechi and a korah, Beis Hillel requires a lechi or a korah. There's no, what's the word? I don't know. There's no qualifications. Kilu, that's the machlokas at any width. Comes this student, the name of Rabbi Yishmael, says actually it only starts at 4 amos. Seder, Tanakama said it's at any width. The student says begins at 4 amos. Rabbi Akiva says the machlokas is both smaller than 4 amos and larger than 4 amos, i.e., the same exact thing as the Tanakama. So what's the nafkamina? So the nafkamina is, if you remember from yesterday, there was the opinion of Rav Achlai in the name, and some say it was Rabbi Yechiel, that the requirement for a lechi and a korah only begins at 4 tefachim. Okay, so according to either the Tanakama or Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says v'lo masami. It's not clear who says what, but according to one of them, the machlokes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would begin at 4 tefachim and until 10 amas, whereas according to the other one, it would even begin at 0 tefachim. Although that would be impossible, I guess, but like one, even less than 4 tefachim, even then the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would apply. Okay, Beseder. Tanya, we learn in a brisa, Amar Rabbi Akiva, said Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva said to this student, right? We said that a certain student said before Rabbi Akiva in the name of Rabbi Yishmael that the machlokas is even, that there's no machlokas, i.e. that everyone agrees that it's either a lechi or a korah when it's less than 4 amas. Okay? So now we learn in a brisa, Amar Rabbi Akiva, that Rabbi Akiva said to this student, Lo Amar Rabbi Yishmael davar zeh. Rabbi Yishmael never said such a thing. Ella, also Talmud Amar davar zeh. Rather, this student made it up. Ve'alacha kosu Talmud. And the halacha is like that student who made up this thing that Rabbi Yishmael never said. So the Gemara asks, Sagufa kasha. This inherently doesn't make sense. On the one hand, Amart, Lo Amar Rabbi Yishmael davar zeh. On the one hand, you're saying, Rabbi Yishmael, there's no way that Rabbi Yishmael ever said such a thing. That the machlokas would only begin at 4 amas width. Which means that clearly, if the student is coming to Rabbi Akiva and saying something in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Akiva is saying, there's no chance that Rabbi Yishmael ever said this, well, clearly then Rabbi Akiva wouldn't turn around and then paskin like this statement that was alleged to Rabbi Yishmael, but is clearly not true. But on the other hand, Vadar Amar Talacha Koso Talmud. But then we're saying that Rabbi Akiva said, and the halacha is like that Talmud. What do you mean? I thought that Talmud was making a mistake. So listen to the Gemara's answer. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Lo Amar Rabbi Akiva el Chadid ba'atamidim. Yes, it's true that Talmud made a mistake. The Talmud was quoting Rabbi Yishmael erroneously. However, Rabbi Akiva wanted to inspire the students. It's like in design thinking, right? In design thinking, when you're doing ideation, there's a concept of yes and, that there's no such thing as a bad idea. That any idea that somebody has, you don't say no, that's a bad idea. You say yes, and also we can even do this differently. Instead of saying that's a bad idea, rather instead let's do this, we say, yeah, that's great, and we can also now do this option as well, right? Meaning everything's building on each other, and that way you get lots of different ideas, and even these ideas that maybe weren't so good, from them come better ideas. So the Gemara is saying that Rabbi Akiva didn't want, you had this student who came in front of him and was quoting Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva didn't just want to say, you're an idiot, get out of here. Rather, sure, the student was making a mistake, but nonetheless, Rabbi Akiva said that the halacha is like the student, so that all the other students who were over there would be inspired to, would not be scared to learn and to say their opinions. Rather, everyone would feel comfortable giving their input. As Rashi says in the Dibra Maschil, Lo Amar Rabbi Akiva, he says, She'asimu libam la Torah, so that the students should place their hearts to the Torah, v'yomu pilpul milibam, and they should feel comfortable saying things on their own. Lefichach shibcho b'fneim. That is why Rabbi Akiva praised this student in front of them, even though he was making a mistake. Wow. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Nirin Itmar. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that Rabbi Akiva didn't say that the halacha is like the student. Rather, it seems like the halacha might be like the student. I guess it's less sort of objective. Okay? Fine. Or maybe he's saying Pashat Kilu, even if Rabbi Yishmael never said that, still what this student is saying makes sense. Okay? Now listen to this, friends. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, said Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol makom she'ata motzei mishum Rabbi Yishmael Omer Talmud Echad Lifnei Rabbi Akiva. Every time in Shas, whenever you find that a certain student said before Rabbi Akiva in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Eino Ela Rab Meir, that student is Rab Meir. Sheshimesh es Rabbi Yishmael ves Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Meir learned both with Rabbi Akiva as well as with Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Meir was a student of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. The Tanis we learn in a Braisa, Rabbi Meir, said Rabbi Meir, K'shayisi etza Rabbi Yishmael, when I was a student by Rabbi Yishmael, Hayisi matil kan kantom l'socha dio. I would put kan kantom into my dio. So Rabbi Meir, as we're going to see in a minute, was a scribe. And he was saying that when he would make his ink, so dio is the ink that we use for writing Sifrei Torah, so he would put kan kantom into the dio, and that would make the ink more permanent. V'lo amar li davar. So when I would mix my dio with kan kantom when I was by Rabbi Yishmael, apparently that was fine. He wouldn't say anything to me. That would be okay. Shabbat eitz Rabbi Akiva asra alai. But when I came to Rabbi Akiva, he said you can't mix kan kantom into dio. The Gemara says, Ini, is this really true? Ve'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Meir. That Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Shmuel from Rabbi Meir. K'shayisi lomed eitz Rabbi Akiva. When I was learning by Rabbi Akiva, hayisi matil kan kantom l'socha dio v'lo amar li davar, I would put kan kantom into the dio, and that was acceptable to him. Uchshabasi eitza Rabbi Yishmael, but then when I later went to Rabbi Yishmael, I eats in the reverse order, right? In the first anecdote, he was first by Rabbi Yishmael and it was okay. Then he went to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Akiva said that was a problem. Now, when he was starting out by Rabbi Akiva, it was okay. Now he's going to Rabbi Yishmael. Amali b'ni ma malachtecha. So when he says that, initially when I was Rabbi Akiva, I would put kan kantom with the dio, and he didn't say anything. Now I went to Rabbi Yishmael and he said to me, my son, what is your profession? I said, I am a scribe. Amrli b'ni, so Rabbi Shmuel said to me, my son, be very, very careful with your scribal work. Because your work is heavenly work. Because maybe you will leave out a letter, right? Rashi gives an example of, for example, what if you say, right, instead of Hashem Elokechem Emes, you write Hashem Elokechem Meis. That's pretty bad stuff. Or maybe if you add an extra letter, right? So for example, right, if it says Vayidaber Hashem, if you add a vav, it says Vayidabru Hashem, which sounds like there's multiple gods. So we don't want that either, right? So Rabbi Shmuel was saying to Meir, you have to be very careful in your profession because, if you leave out a letter or add a letter, nimtzeis machav es kol ha'olam kula, you can end up destroying the entire world. Amarti lo. So Rabbi Meir says that I said to Rabbi Shmuel, Davar echad yeshli, I've got a secret. I've got this one thing, v'kan kantom shmo, and it's called kan kantom. Shani mati l'sochadio, that I put into the ink. Omarli, and Rabbi Shmuel said to me, v'chimatilin kan kantom l'sochadio. Are you really allowed to do that? Are you allowed to put kan kantom into dio? V'alo amrator, but the pasuk says in the Torah, in the context of a sota, of a woman who's suspected by her husband of having an affair, b'chasav umacha, ksav shiachol limchos, that this needs to be written, writing that is possible to be erased. And if you put kan kantom into the dio, then it can't be erased. So we see that Rabbi Shmuel was not a big fan of Rabbi Meir using kan kantom in the dio because it is permanent. The Gemara says, how does Rabbi Meir's response make sense in the context of Rabbi Shmuel's question or statement? Right? Rabbi Shmuel says, wow, you're a scribe. You have to be really careful that you don't leave out a letter or add a letter. To which Rabbi Meir responds, I use kan kantom in my dio. How does one answer the other? So this is what Rabbi Meir was saying to Rabbi Shmuel. He says, look, Rabbi Shmuel, you don't have to worry about me leaving out letters or adding letters. I'm an expert. I'm not going to leave out letters. I'm not going to add letters. If there's one thing that maybe you're concerned about, but even for the possible concern that maybe a fly is going to come and sit itself down on the crown of the Dalet, or I guess on that little thing on the Dalet that sticks out to the right, and erase it, and then the Dalet will essentially just become a resh. Well, for that, meaning you don't have to be concerned about me adding or removing letters. That's not a concern. But maybe you'll be concerned that maybe a fly will come and erase part of a dalet and make it into a reish. Well, for that, you also don't have to be concerned. Because davar echad yeshli v'kan kantom shmo, I have this thing called kan kantom, shani mati l'soch adio, that I put into the ink. And therefore, it makes the ink permanent, and even flies will be unable to make daleds into reishes. Kasha shimush hashimush, kasha asra asra. So Gemara says we have two problems over here. One is that in the first story it says that he was originally by Rabbi Shmuel, and he would use this kan kantom and it was no problem. And then afterwards he went to Rabbi Akiva and it was a problem. And the second story, first he was by Rabbi Akiva and then later he went to Rabbi Shmuel. So that's question number one, right? Who was he a student of first? Question number two is in the first story, Rabbi Shmuel is okay with using kan kantom and Rabbi Akiva has a problem with it. And in the second story, it's the opposite. Rabbi Akiva is okay with it, and Rabbi Shmuel responds to it. So, Bishlam Hashimush Hashimush Lo Kasha. So, in terms of who was he a student of first, no problem. I'll tell you who was a student of first. Meikara also Lakamid Rabbi Akiva. Initially, Rabbi Meir's first stop was to be a student of Rabbi Akiva. However, he was unable to keep up. As Rashi says, It's sort of, there's a two dots in the middle, there's a Rashi Dibra Maskul Kasha Shimush Hashimush. In the middle of that, there's a two dots. Right after that, it says, Rabbi Akiva ayacharif tuva. Rabbi Akiva was very, very sharp. V'lo matzi Rabbi Meir l'meikam alibe. Rabbi Meir couldn't keep up at that point. So says the Gemara also, l'kamed Rabbi Yishmael. So, Rabbi Meir then went to study by Rabbi Yishmael, and as Rashi said, he says, v'gomer Gemara. And as Rashi says, Mishnayos Shekibim Arabosov. So he first went to Rabbi Yishmael, and he learned lots of Mishnayos. He learned lots of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And then he went back to Rabbi Akiva. V'hadar also l'kamed Rabbi Akiva v'savar svara. Then, once he kind of got all the Bekiyas, he then went back to Rabbi Akiva and learned all the pilpul and the questions and the answers and all that stuff. So he started by Rabbi Akiva. He then went to Rabbi Yishmael, and then he went back to Rabbi Akiva. Kasha. What do you do about the fact that first it said that Rabbi Shmuel was okay with the kankantom and Rabbi Akiva was not, and then we see the reverse? Yeah, we don't know how to answer that question. Okay. Tanya, we learn in the Brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Meir Aya Omer. So Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Meir would say. So we're going to have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov about what Rabbi Meir's opinion was regarding using kankantom, regarding the parshas that we write for a sota and dissolve in water. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So we learn in the Brayso that Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Meir Haya Omer, that Rabbi Meir would say, Lakol matilin kankantom l'socha dio. You're allowed to put kankantom into dio and make it permanent ink for the entire Sefer Torah chutz mi parshas sota. However, parshas sota in the Sefer Torah, you cannot use kankantom for that. Okay, fine. We'll see in a minute why. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, says Rabbi Yaakov, Mishmo, Rabbi Yaakov says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Chutz mi parshas sota shebemikdash. So, Rabbi Yaakov says in the name of Rabbi Meir that you can use kankantom for the entire Sefer Torah, including parshas sota. However, when they would write the Megillas Sota in the Beis HaMikdash, that when a woman who was suspected of adultery would come to the Beis HaMikdash, and there was a whole process, they'd have to create this drink, and part of the process they would write these psukim from the Torah and erase it in water. So that, says Rabbi Yaakov, cannot be written in kankantom, with kankantom in the dio, because that would make the ink permanent, and we have to be able to erase this ink. So that you cannot use kankantom. But anywhere in the Torah, the entire Torah, you could write with kankantom in the dio. My benayu, what's the nafkamina between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov in their explanations of Rabbi Meir? The nafkamina is, are you able to actually use the parsha of sota that's like in a Sefer Torah for a sota, or do you have to specifically write a separate Megillah and use that for a sota? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you're not allowed to use kankantom for the parsha sota in a Sefer Torah, that's because you could use it theoretically for an actual sota, and therefore it has to be erasable. Whereas Rabbi Yaakov says, no way. You can't use the parsha of sota written in the Torah for a sota. You have to write a specific Megillas sota. So therefore, like a separate one at the time of the incident, you write these psukim for this situation, and that's what you use, but you don't actually use an actual Sefer Torah for this. And therefore, the entire Sefer Torah can be written with kankantom in the dio. And let's say that the machlokas tanoim between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov is like a similar machlokas tanoim. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brayso, in Megillas Kshera Lashgos Ba Sota Acheres, that if you write a Megillas Sota for Rachel, and then if she admits that she had an affair, meaning if she admits off the bat that she had an affair, so then we don't get started with the sota process. But even up until the point where she actually drinks this water, this sota water, this water that checks and magically can tell if she had an extramarital relationship. So up until that point where she drinks this water, we try to convince her to admit if she actually, if she really did it. So if at any point, if at some point after this Megillah Sota was written for Rachel, she admitted to having an affair, so then the question is, so we already wrote this Megillah, now comes Leah, whose husband suspects her, well then, can we use Rachel's Megillah that we don't need anymore? Can we just use that one for Leah, or do we have to write a specific one for Leah? So the Tanna Kama says, you have to write a specific one for Leah. You can't use Rachel's Megillah for Leah. Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia Amar Megillah Sakshera Lashkos Ba Sota Acheres. Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia says, no, it's no problem. You can use Rachel's Megillah for Leah. No problem. It's written already. You can recycle it. Okay? So we want to say that the Tanna Kama says that you're not allowed to use the Rachel's Megillah for Leah is like Rabbi Yaakov, who says that you're not allowed to use the Parsha in the Torah for the Sota, i.e. you have to write a specific Megillah for a specific person. And we want to say that Rav Achai Bar Yoshia, who says that you can use Rachel's Megillah for Leah, is like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you can use the Sefer, the Parsha in the Torah for a Sota. It doesn't specifically have to be written for the Sota. So Amar Rav Papa Dilma Lohi. Rav Papa says maybe these two brises don't align, because you can argue Ad Kan Lo Ka'amar Tanna Kama Asam, that in the second brisa that Tanna Kama said that you can't use Rachel's Megillah for Leah, Ela Kevin the intik l'shum Rachel sulo hadra mintika l'shum Leah. Since you specifically wrote it for Rachel, you can't just turn around now and use it for Leah. You specifically wrote it for Rachel. Aval, but maybe the Tanna Kama would say that Gabe Torah distama michtava, that by using the Parsha in the Sefer Torah, where it wasn't written for a specific person, it was just written as a Sefer Torah, Hachinami, the Machkinon, you would be allowed to use it. So it's unclear what to apply the Tanna Kama's opinion and align that with our machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Dilma Lohi, he also says that maybe you can't compare these two brises, because Ad Kan Lo Ka'amar Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia Hasam, that Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia, who says that you are allowed to use Rachel's Megillah Sota for Leah, Ela de'ichtiv mias l'shum Sota ba'olam, because over there, at least this Megillah Sota, the Megillah Sota that he wrote for Rachel was written to be used for a Sota. Aval gabe Torah d'islamid ksiva, but Torah wasn't written to be used as Megillah Sota. It was used to learn, so you can learn from the Torah. So achinami d'lo machkinan. So maybe there, even Rav Achai Bar Yoshia would say that you wouldn't be allowed to use the Sefer Torah for the Megillah Sota. Okay, so basically Rav Papa and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak show that you cannot necessarily align this brisa regarding reusing a Megillah Sota with the original brisa about can you write the Parsha in the Torah of Sota with Kan Kantom. Okay. The Gemara asks, V'leisle Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia haditnan? 1 second. Rabbi Achai Bar Yoshia, who says that you are allowed to recycle Rachel's Megillah Sota for Leah, does he not hold of the following Mishnah in Gittin? Kasav get legarish asishto. If Reuven wrote a get in order to divorce his wife, v'nimlach, and then he decided, you know what? I don't want to get a divorce. But he already wrote the get. V'nimlach, v'nimtzu umitzau ben iro. And I guess a different Reuven in his town found him. And guess what? This Reuven also had a wife with the same name as the other Reuven's wife. And they both live in the same town. Everything's mamish the same. You could literally just take the get that Reuven number 1 wrote for his wife, and Reuven number 2 can give it to his wife. All the information is already accurate. Look, you and I have the same name. Our wives have the same name. Nonetheless, even though it sounds like a perfect situation, a great idea, it wouldn't actually work. And the reason is because it says by a sota, it says v'chosav la. It says you have to write not by sota, I'm sorry, it says by a get v'chosav la. That you have to write the get for the specific person that you're giving it to. Even if all the names and all the technicalities line up, The fact of the matter is, it wasn't written for the person, it must be written for the person who it's given to. And if Ruvain number 1 wrote it for his wife, well then Ruvain number 2 can't give it to his wife since it wasn't written for her, even if all the names are accurate. So now the Havmin is to say, is that also when it comes to Sota, it says Ve'asala, you have to make for her. So I would assume that if just like by a get, you have to write the get for the person who is ultimately going to receive it. So I would assume that by a sota, you'd have to write the Megillah Sota for the person who it's ultimately for. And therefore, doesn't that imply that I would be unable to write a Megillah Sota for Rachel and then recycle it for Leah? So how could Rav Achai Bar Yoshia say that would be acceptable? So the Gemara answers, when it comes to a get, it's clear that you have to write the get for the recipient. We need the writing to be for that recipient. But by sota v'asala, it doesn't say you have to write it for her, it says you have to do it for her. The doing has to be lishma. What's considered the doing? The doing is the erasing. The erasing needs to be lishma. But the writing, it's possible to write it for Rachel and then give it to Leah. Okay. Chevra, you ready? Here we go. It was known before God that in Reb Meir's generation there was nobody as great as Reb Meir. Chevra, who was in Reb Meir's generation? Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Reb Yehuda, Reb Yossi, Rabbi Nechemia, we're going to see in a minute, was called Rabbi Noarai. These are great, great Tanaim. Nonetheless, there was nobody in Rabbi Meir's generation as great as he. And how come we don't paskin like Rabbi Meir? Because his friends couldn't keep up with him. They couldn't, he was so smart, he was so knowledgeable, that it was unclear to tell what exactly was halacha and what was not. What does that mean? He could say about something that is tameh, that actually it's tahor, and give all sorts of reasons why it should be tahor. Even though it's not, it's tameh. But he could convince you that it's tahor. He could show you that it's tahor even though it's tameh. Al tahor tameh umar lo panim. And he could take something that's tahor and explain to you why it should be tameh. Meaning he was so knowledgeable. He knew so much that he could make Torah and bend it and move it in any way, in any way that he liked, and therefore it was hard to tell what was actually the halacha and what was just pilpul and what was just shimush tamidei chacham, what was just lulei torascha shashua, having a good time with Torah and enjoying studying Torah, but it was hard to tell what was actually practically what can we do. Tana lo Rabbi Meir shmo. It was taught that his name wasn't Rabbi Meir, ela Rabbi Noarai shmo. His real name was Rabbi Noarai. So why do they call him Rabbi Meir? V'lama nikra shmo Rabbi Meir shehu Meir einei chacham b'halacha, because he would lighten up the eyes of the rabbis with halacha. V'lo Noarai shmo, and there was another teacher who they would call Rabbi Noarai, but that wasn't actually his name. Meaning, Rabbi Meir's real name was Rabbi Noarai, but they called him Rabbi Meir because he was Meir Einei Chacham Ba'alacha. There was another teacher who wasn't actually named Rabbi Noarai, but they would call him Rabbi Noarai. Ella, Rabbi Nechemia Shmo, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach Shmo. And as we saw in Masechta Shabbos, that this Rabbi Noarai wasn't actually technically named Rabbi Noarai, he was really Rabbi Nechemia, or he was really Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who was that student, the greatest of the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who ended up getting sidetracked by those very fancy waters. I don't remember where exactly. So then why did they call Rabbi Nechemia or Rabbi Elazar ben Arach? Why did they call him Rabbi Noarai? Because he would lighten up the eyes of the rabbis in halacha. Omar Rabbi, listen to this, friends. Said Rabbi, how come I am sharper than all my friends? Because I saw Reb Meir from behind him. What if I would see in Mamash Reb Meir's face? I would be even sharper. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, that your eyes will see your teacher. It says Rashi, D'chazize le Reb Meir me'achorei, k'shelamadti lefanav, when I learned before him, yashavti b'shua shel acharav, I sat in a row that was behind him. So it's super interesting because it also shows that Rebbe learned by Rabbi Meir. We saw in Masechta Shabbos, and Daf Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, that Rebbe learned by Reb Shimon ben Yochai. And here we're seeing that Rebbe also learned by Rabbi Meir. And he's saying that since he sat in the row behind Reb Meir, so because he had that opportunity, so that's why he's sharper than all of his peers. However, if he would have been able to sit in the row in front of Reb Meir and see and look at Reb Meir's face, forget it, he would have been even that much sharper. And Mistama Rebbe was also a student of his father, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Abau, says Rabbi Abau, Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Tamar Hayel, Reb Meir. Reb Meir had a certain student, V'Sumchus Shmo, and that student's name was Sumchus. Shaya Omer al kol davar v'davar shel tuma arba'im v'shmona taimei tuma. That on every single thing that was tamei, Sumchus was able to give you 148 reasons why it was in fact tamei. V'al kol davar v'davar shel taira arba'im v'shmona taimei taira. And for every single thing that's tahor, Sumchus was able to explain 148 reasons why it is in fact tahor. Meaning why everything tamei is tamei, why everything tahor is tahor. Tana, it was taught, Talmud Vasikaya b'Yavne, there was an older student in Yavne, Shahaya mitayr es asheretz b'mea v'chamishim taimim. He can give you 150 reasons why a sheretz should actually be tahor. Ravina an yadun v'tayrenu. Ravina says, look, I can also give you a reason why a sheretz should be tahor. Umanocha shememis umar betuma tahor. A snake that kills people and increases tuma, yet when a snake dies, it's not going to be tamei tumas sheretz. It's not one of the shmona shratzim that we learned about in Masechta Shabbos. Sheretz she'ein me'emis umar betuma. Epis, a mouse that doesn't kill and bring tuma, or a weasel with a chvaisnish. Lo kol shekain, then certainly when it dies, it shouldn't be tamei, right? If a snake when it dies is not tamei, then a weasel when it dies it shouldn't be tamei. V'loi, it's not true. Ma'aseh ba'al makavid. Ravina was just kind of joking around. Okay, say that. I guess what? That wasn't like a good kind of proof? Okay. Okay. Chevre, are you ready for this extremely famous Gemara? Rabbi Abba, Shmuel, Shalosh shanim nechleku Beis Shammai uBeis Hillel, that for 3 years, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued. 3 years doesn't sound like that much time to me. I thought it was going to be like 300 years. Okay, for 3 years, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued. Halalu omrim halacha k'moseinu, v'halalu omrim halacha k'moseinu. These would say that the halacha is like us. Rabbi Shammai would say the halacha is like us. Beis Hillel would say the halacha is like us. Yatsa ba'askol ve'amra. A voice came out from heaven and said, Eilu va'eilu divrei Elokim Chaim hein. Both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are divrei Elokim Chaim. They are the words of the living God. Ve'alacha k'Beis Hillel. But the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Now if both the opinions of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are the words of the living God, then how come passing like Beis Hillel? Why not passing like Beis Shammai? Because Beis Hillel, they were kind of chilled and they were patient. And they would teach, whenever they would give their opinion, they wouldn't only give their opinion, they would also explain how come they disagree with Beis Shammai's opinion. And as Rashi gives an example from Masechta Brachos, that in explaining Kriyas Shema, Beis Shammai says you have to lie down and stand up in the morning and the night, respectively. Because it says, B'shoch b'cha when you lie down, uvkumecha when you get up. Beis Hillel says, no, you can do it however you want. It says, uvlechtcha b'derech. And then Beis Hillel says, and what do we do with Beis Shammai's pasuk of B'shoch b'cha uvkumecha? B'shoch b'cha uvkumecha? At the time when people are sleeping and the time when people are getting up. So they don't only say their reason, but also explain why they disagree with Beis Shammai's reason. And not only that, rather that they always precede Beis Shammai's opinion before they explain their own opinion. Kosa Shaninu, like we learn in Masechta Sukkah. Misha Hayrubo Murosho Vrubo Besukah B'Shulchan B'Soch Habayis. Somebody who had his head and most of his body in the sukkah, but his table was in his house. Beishamai Poson Vesil Machshirin. Beishamai says that is not an acceptable situation. It's not a kosher sukkah. It's a pasul sukkah. And Beisil says that that's a kosher sukkah. All you need is Rosh V'Rubo. Amru Beisil Beishamai. Now Beisil said to Beishamai, Bingo, that's the key point over there. Was there not a story where the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel went, Levakas Rabbi Yochanan ben Achoronis, to visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Achoronis? So we see, meaning Beis Hillel, okay, you have Rosh V'Rubo V'Shulchan, right? Rosh V'Rubo B'Soch HaSukkah V'Shulchan B'Soch HaBayis. That's the case, right? Beis Shammai says pasul, Beis Hillel says kosher. Now Beis Hillel responds to Beis Shammai and they say, but wasn't there a story where the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel, meaning Beis Hillel is responding to Beis Shammai, yet when they're saying the story, they don't say the elders of Beis Hillel and the elders of Beis Shammai, rather the elders of Beis Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel, they put Beis Shammai first. And they found that Rabbi Yochanan ben Achoronis was sitting, and his head and most of his body was in the sukkah, and his table was inside the house. So Amru Loyan, right? So we see that would be acceptable. So Amru Loyan, Beis Shammai responded to Beis Hillel, Misham Raya, are you really bringing a proof from Rabbi Yochanan ben Achoronis? Guess what? Afin Amrulo, the elders of Beis Shammai said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Achoronis, Im kacha yisa noeg, if this is how you always sit in your sukkah, well then lo kayamtu mitzvah sukkah miyamecha, you never actually were mekayim in your entire life the mitzvah of sukkah, because this is a pasul sukkah. Okay, so that's the anecdote. But the point from that anecdote is that it shows that Beis Hillel would always put Beis Shammai before themselves. To teach you that anybody who lowers himself down, God will raise him up. Anybody who raises himself up artificially, God will lower him down. Somebody who chases greatness, well, greatness runs away from him. But anybody who runs away from greatness, well, greatness is chasing after him. As we learned on Daf Samach Dal, the final Daf of Masechta Brachos, anybody who forces the hour, well, then the hour forces him. And Rashi explains over here, in the Dibra Maska Adochik Esasha, Misyagel Lahashir Lizgadel, he's just putting in lots of work to become rich and to become great, but he's saying that he's not being successful, and even so, he doesn't give up because there's a sunken cost. And he just goes further and further away, and goes as to every corner of the earth to try to find wealth and greatness. And even if it's not working, he doesn't give up and he keeps at it. Well, that isn't the best use of his time. Interesting. But if he sort of is kind of chilled and realizes okay, if now's not the right time, I won't pursue it now, but it'll be there for me later, and sure enough, it will find him later. And we saw that story in Brachos with Rav Yosef and Rabbah, that Rav Yosef was supposed to be the Rosh Hashiva first, but whatever, he had that thing with the stargazers that he saw he was going to be Rosh Hashiva for 2.5 years and then die. So he said Rabbah can be Rosh Hashiva first, and the honor of being Rosh Hashiva was nonetheless waiting for him and preserved for him when he was ready for it later on. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, that for 2.5 years Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued. One opinion was saying that it's better that a person shouldn't be born rather than that he should be born. Better that a person should be born rather than that he shouldn't be born. They decided that this is the answer. That while it's better for a person not to be born than to be born, now that he's here and he's born, then he should do tshuva. Okay. Those who say that he should always be taking his actions into account. If there's a mitzvah to be done, he should make a cheshbon. Sure, they might have this downside of doing the mitzvah, but look at the upside of doing the mitzvah. And if there's an avera to be done, he should say, sure, I might have an immediate benefit if I do this avera, but if I don't do the avera, but then again, look at the downside of doing the avera as well. That was Masechta Yud Gimel that was Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Ayruvin. So it was mostly super interesting agadatas, a lot of them about Rabbi Meir and how awesome he was. We also had that extremely famous Gemara about the voice that came out of heaven and said that we paskin like Beis Hillel. Now, let's just go over that kind of one like machlokas that we had at the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, which was, can you use the actual parsha of sota that's written in the Torah in the process of working with the sota in the Beis HaMikdash? So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Meir that yes, you may, and therefore you cannot write that parsha with kan tom in the dio. Rabbi Yaakov says in the name of Rabbi Meir that no, you may not use the parsha of sota in the Torah for a sota, so therefore you can use kan tom in the dio. Then there was a machlokas about reusing a Megillah Sota. If you wrote a Megillah Sota for Rachel, can you then reuse it for Leah? So the Tanakama says no. Rav Acha bar Yoshia says yes. That was Daf Yud Gimel Masechta Ayruvin. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did, and have an awesome day. Peace out.